for everyone who's already attending, thank you very much for joining in. We're going to wait another couple of minutes or so and then we'll start. All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the third virtual Hopkins Hour. I'm sure that you are much more relaxed with the online environment than we as presenters are. I can't see you at the moment. I can't even see myself, but we're in the safe hands of Makala on the other side if needed. So far everything goes well, I think. I would like to also welcome all the Hopkins Center members, the partners and the collaborators. Now, before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather virtually, and I would like to pay my respect to everyone, including all the elders, past, present, and emerging. For those who do not know me, my name is Michel Kopites. I'm professor at Griffith University, and together with Karen Water, we are both stream leaders for the Therapeutic Interventions and Practices research stream at the Hopkins Center. And I'm also leading the musculoskeletal health and persistent pain research group at Griffith University. Today, I'm also joined by Den Havey. Den Havey is an NHMRC postdoc at Griffith University and at the Hopkins Center. And his interest is really in the technology in rehabilitation. So, and virtual reality is an important part of that. A few more housekeeping things before we start. If you experience technical difficulties and you still have a connection, you can type in your worries in the Q&A box, and the link for that you can find on the toolbar on the right. And then Makala will try to solve it or keep you up to date if there is an issue. If you have to go in the meantime, before the presentation is finished, it's no problem. The session is being recorded. So you can pause and come back later, or we will also post the recordings in the next few days. Then you can always come back to it, and we'll also give you the PowerPoint presentations, etc. So everything you see on the screen, you will receive. At the end of the two presentations, so I will start and then we'll take over. We'll have time for some questions and answers. If you have questions during the presentation, it would probably be good to type them in the Q&A box, then Makala can monitor them. And the most frequently asked questions can then get priority. So if you have questions, I would say submit them straight away. All right, let's get started then. So I will start off by giving a brief explanation about virtual reality and chronic pain, and then talk a little bit about the background of a Hopkins seed grant we received and looking at virtual reality for patients with spinal cord injury related pain. Then Dan will take over for the second half, and he will present a case study of a low back pain patient and the use of virtual reality. He will then expand on virtual reality possibilities for patients with neck pain, pain education, etc. Now, before we start, I think it's good to make a distinction between virtual reality in acute pain management and chronic pain management. Virtual reality was introduced in acute pain management in conditions such as burns, etc., when they had to undergo painful procedures such as wound dressings, etc. And then people noticed that if you distract people by virtual reality, that their pain perceptions during the procedures were a lot less. And that was then also tested on the left here in more experimental situations. For example, people submerge their hand in a bucket with ice cold water, which I can guarantee you hurts, and then with and without virtual reality. And the studies clearly show that if you are in virtual reality and you have a noxious stimulus, you rate that a lot less painful as when you're not in that virtual reality environment. Studies also show that if you then ask for people's memories 2 or 3 weeks later, for example, about that painful experience, their memories of the pain are a lot less pain intensity, different type of memories are formed. And we all know how important pain memories are for future pain experiences and anticipation of pain. So it probably works both ways. And less pain at the time, but also less creation of painful memories. And the underlying mechanism probably is distraction. That's probably one of the most important mechanisms why people experience less pain. Things obviously are a bit more complicated in chronic pain conditions. And there's probably a whole suite of mechanisms how virtual reality in chronic pain management might work. One of them, no doubt, is still a little bit of distraction. And people have tried to put people in pleasant environments or change them to activities that distract them, etc. That has some effects, but it might be relatively short-lived, and there might not be a very long carryover effect once you're at virtual reality. There's psychological interventions that have been tried, addressing depression, anxiety, etc. Considering their close link with pain, these VR psychological interventions have also shown to have an effect on pain. More recently, virtual reality is used for pain education, so educating the patient about the meaning of pain, etc. More on a neuroscience point of view, and Dan will talk a little bit more about that. And if you look at those VR applications, they really range from not using very much VR at all, and almost just simply translating the content and putting it into a VR environment, but not really utilizing the VR capabilities, to really using the VR capabilities. Another thing which Dan will talk about is embodiment. So, and you change into an avatar, you can do things again that you no longer could, or other things where you really take advantage of the utilities of VR. And one thing I would like to talk about is that how we use VR here is that we're trying to address some of the underlying pathophysiological mechanisms. And that's a bit the common theme within the persistent pain research unit, is that we're trying new interventions that are biologically plausible. So interventions that try to reverse or target at those pathobiological mechanisms that are linked to pain. And one of those, and I'll spend quite a bit of time on that, is changed cortical representation in patients in pain. This is nothing new, of course. You all know that your body is virtually represented in your brain in different homunculi, one of them being the somatosensory homunculus in your brain. And as you all remember, that is more or less somatotopically organized, and your virtual toes are close to your virtual foot, to your ankle, to your virtual knee, and so on. It's not perfect. Your head is moved further distally, and your tongue is no longer in your mouth, but it's closer to your real ear, so to speak. So it's moved a little bit further down. Now, if you understand the somatotopic organization here, you can also understand some of the changes that we see in for example, patients with amputations. So if you have a hand amputation, that representation in your brain of your hand and your fingers is no longer needed. So that area will shrink, and other areas will invade that area where you used to have your virtual hand in your brain. And that explains why some people have, for example, these somewhat strange sensations. If a person with an amputation, if you touch their cheek, they might feel it as if you're touching their index finger or their thumb or their middle finger, for example. Now, these changes in cortical representation are not only present in very severe conditions such as amputation, but also in less severe conditions such as complex regional pain syndrome. The idea is the same if you look to the right image. And the red circle is the 5th digit, and the blue square is the 1st digit. On the left side of the image, you can see that a normal distance between these two areas in your brain is roughly 2 centimeters. In a patient with complex regional pain syndrome, and the area that represents the affected hand, it has shrunk to less than a centimeter. And so you get these changes in the representation in your brain. We see that again in less far severe conditions, such as carpal tunnel syndrome, which is just a relatively minor condition, which is a compression of your median nerve at your wrist, affecting the radial side of your hand. But the same thing here, if you look at the circles on the small circles with the digits in it on the right side of the screen, blue in the middle panel, 2, 3, and 5 are the corresponding fingers, and you look at the distance between the second and the third finger. If you then look to the right image, you can see that the area between the second and the third finger are closer together. So again, there's a cortical change in, a change in cortical representation of your affected fingers. It's been shown for multiple conditions, and fairly recently it's also been shown in spinal cord injury, and that there is a functional reorganization in the brain in people with spinal cord injury. And a quote here from the paper is that change in reorganization may have pathological consequences, such as phantom limb sensations and neuropathic pain. Now I'm going to make a little sidestep here and talk for a minute about left-right discrimination. What we mean with left-right discrimination, that is your ability to recognize an image of a, for example, hand in this case, as belonging to the left or the right side of your body. And so the image on the left with the thumb and the index finger pointing up, and that's clearly an image of a right hand. So if your left-right discrimination is intact, you can quickly and accurately decide that that is a right hand. Now, if you look to the graph on the right, at the top right, if we do this in patients with unilateral carpal tunnel syndrome and no other conditions, we can see that they are, and let's say, for example, they have left side carpal tunnel syndrome, then they are 10% less accurate in identifying an image on a screen showing a left hand than an image shown on the screen showing a right hand. And this has been shown either for accuracy or for recognition time for lots of conditions again. So patients with chronic conditions seems to be less accurate in correctly identifying an affected body part as being belong to the left or the right side of the body. That's not a generic thing. If you show them pictures of left and right feet, it's the same, they're just as fast and just as accurate. And if we ask them to, and we show them a picture of a person turning their head to the left or to the right, they're equally quick again, and no difference with healthy people. And the same if we give them rather abstract figures and they need to say whether they're mirrored or just rotated. And so it's not a general problem. It seems to be really specific to their affected body part. Whether that links, whether that is a clinical manifestation of that altered brain representation, we really don't know. It's tempting to think it is, but we don't really know. All right, let's go back then to virtual reality. And you could consider that mirror therapy might be one of the very first forms of mirror therapy, of virtual reality. People are not familiar with mirror therapy. It works very well, for example, for upper limb conditions, an amputation of your hand, complex regional pain syndrome. You put your affected hand, you hide it behind the mirror. You position yourself in such a way that when you look into the mirror and you see the reflection of your unaffected hand, that you have the illusion or the virtual image of a healthy affected hand now. So your affected hand will look just as healthy, just as normal, or be present as your unaffected hand is. And then you can make movements or other functional tasks, etc., to convince your brain that your hand is normal. It's been tried in many conditions, and there's multiple systematic reviews, and the overall conclusion is that this seems to be efficient for people like stroke or complex regional pain syndrome or or phantom limb pain, for example. This has then also been tried in a very basic way, roughly 15 years ago, with patients with spinal cord injury. So the setup on the left is that people have used a mirror, so the patient sees himself or herself in the mirror, but it's only a half mirror, so they only see up from the trunk and the head and arms, but they don't see their legs or they don't see the wheelchair. So instead of that, there's a movie projected of a person walking towards them. So basically what they see in front of them is themselves walking towards them. And then they try to synchronize the cadence by moving their arms at the same speed as what they see, and the legs moving, so to speak. Now, this is all very experimental, of course. You need a projector to be able to do it. And there's only 5 patients in this pilot trial. And if you look now on the graph on the right, the gray shaded areas is the 10 minutes while the patient was virtually walking. The different panels, A to E, are 5 different patients. And the solid line is basically the pain intensity. And if you see, then you see a fairly spectacular drop in pain intensity in most participants while they are virtually walking. Now, if you look at panel E, you can see that that patient has an opposite trend. The pain increases, despite the fact that after 45 seconds, the movie was aborted. So basically, there was so much distress that after 45 seconds, they decided to stop the movie. There was no virtual walking anymore, but the increase in pain continued. And of course, it is highly distressing if for the first time you might be able to see yourself walking again. So for many, this will be too big of a jump. As technology progressed, rather than using a mirror and a projector showing a movie and trying to adjust your cadence to the movie, basically with advanced in VR, people have now changed. Basically, you're holding the hand controls in your hand, and then you, by swinging your arms, dictating the speed of the movie in front of you. And so swinging faster means the character in front of you will move faster, just to make that reality, that virtual body more like your own, so to speak. Of course, you're still looking at someone else moving, and you're looking at the back of yourself, which is normally, of course, not a view that you typically have of yourself. And so, but it's a recent progress. Now, again, a little sidestep. If you think again about mirror therapy with patients with complex regional pain syndrome, for many it's too big of a step to see an intact hand again. So rather than putting people straight into a mirror box, people have argued, well, maybe we need to set a few steps earlier, such as left-right discrimination, for example. I've shown you this earlier. That is affected in people with complex regional pain syndrome. They're not as accurate in identifying left to right and their affected body part. So let's train that first for a few weeks. Once they've mastered that, they can then go to the next phase, which is motor imagery. They then imagine that they perform a series of movements with their affected hand, and only then do we do mirror therapy or virtual reality. There is not a lot of evidence, simply because it hasn't been researched in great detail, but there is some evidence that shows that if you do that in this sequence, which we call graded motor imagery, so it's a graded approach, that it's more beneficial for patients than going straight into mirror therapy, or by even changing the order and starting with mirror therapy and then motor imagery and then left-right discrimination, for example. So there is some evidence to suggest in patients with complex regional pain syndrome that it makes sense to do these 2 stages before you do mirror therapy or virtual reality. That makes sense also for spinal cord injury patients, because we know that left-right recognition of patients with spinal cord injury, for example, of their feet, is affected. So they're less accurate compared to healthy people, of course not left to right, but compared to healthy people in identifying their body parts as being a left foot or a right foot. So it probably makes perfect sense to start with left-right discrimination. If we look quickly at a scoping review, then we can see that virtual walking has indeed benefits, and there's some small studies that show that it is beneficial. There's a lot more research to do, of course. And what we're trying to do in a seed grant that we recently received, that started early this year, is rather than putting people straight into a virtual walking program, is to do this more gradual graded motor imagery approach, where we first do left-right recognition of feet, then we do motor imagery, and only then do we do virtual reality. And on the left bottom side here, you can see all the collaborators in this Hopkins seed grant. And perhaps maybe now 20 seconds is a good moment to remind you of the next round of Hopkins seed grants that is open now, and that will close, if I'm not mistaken, the beginning of September the 4th, if I'm correct. But all details are on the Hopkins website. So if you have brilliant ideas, start thinking and start putting teams together. All right. So just to finish off, where are we roughly in the development of this grant? We've set up everything for discrimination test and training. That's done. Motor imagery is not so much a problem. The big challenge is, of course, is creating a credible virtual reality environment. And a bit differently than what you've seen so far is we're not using mirrors, or we're not using this approach what you see on the right side, where the person sees himself or an image or an avatar from the back. And so what we're trying to create is really a patient-centered view, or a first people's view, where the person, when they look down, see an avatar with their own legs moving, so to speak. So again, we're using those hand controllers. So if people swing their arms, they start moving. The quicker and the more vigorously they swing their arms, the quicker they walk, and the bigger their stride lengths will become. But they can also look up basically, and then look at a photorealistic environment, look down again at their feet and see themselves walking or climbing stairs, etc. So that's basically a bit of the step up again from the things I've been showing you up to now. I've only have a still image here. It's work on the construction. I think we're halfway there, but it's still something that is in further development. So, but that's roughly a bit of an overview about what we're trying to do, trying to address this cortical reorganization that might be linked to pain, which I explained to you earlier. And that's the end of my presentation. Questions are more than welcome towards the end. I'm gonna move back and hand over to Dan, who will be able, so excuse us for a second if this doesn't go 100% smoothly. All right, thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I can't see you there now, but hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end, and we can interact a bit there. So I'm going to focus today on a study funded by Hopkins seed grant, but I'll expand a little bit from there as well on some other things that we're doing with virtual reality in the persistent pain space. So just a little bit about how I think about virtual reality in pain treatment. Some of this will link nicely to what Michelle's already introduced. So I too think about virtual reality in terms of what might be useful in acute pain and what might be useful in chronic pain. And what I've done here is just outlines the range of mechanisms that we might leverage in pain treatment. So these orange ones are those that might facilitate a short-term, and the green ones a longer-term benefit. So distraction is the one that's been leveraged mostly in the acute pain space, but there are a couple of other mechanisms that are interesting to consider as well. So one is the idea that there's competition between networks of neurons in the cortex, and sometimes they compete in ways that might result in analgesia. So in the procedures for burns space, people are using virtual environments that aren't just distracting, but bring people into a context which is contradictory to the context they're in, which is more associated with heat than cold. So there's perhaps some additional analgesia that can come from the specific environment that people are put into. You can also feel quite disembodied in virtual reality if you don't have a body. So if you look down and it seems like you're floating in space. So there's possibly an additional analgesic benefit that can come from the feeling of being detached from your body, which might otherwise be quite uncomfortable. And there's probably some mechanisms that we don't know about yet as well. So in the domain of things that might be useful for some more ongoing benefit in the persistent pain space, I'm going to move from those that seem a bit more conventional to those that are a bit more theoretical. So of course we can use virtual reality to facilitate therapeutic movement and exercise, and there's some good reasons you might want to do that. Perhaps it might be nice to do therapeutic exercise in a distracting environment. Perhaps you do it for the engagement and the fun of it, the visual feedback, those sort of things. It can also facilitate meditation and behavioural skills training in virtual reality. That can be quite nice. We can facilitate pain education and behavioural activation. I'm going to touch on the pain education as we go and why it might be interesting to do pain education in a virtual environment as opposed to reading a book, watching a video, or having it in person. Then there's the graded motor imagery stuff that Michelle's focused on, and then there's what I'm going to focus on mostly here, which Michelle's also touched on, is how we might modulate body representations and body image. So I'm going to focus on a treatment we've developed here that we've called virtual reality body image training. I'll talk about what it is, present a case report, and also outline just briefly a pilot RCT that we have running at Metro South, the Burke Street Pain Centre now. And if there's time, I'll give you a peek into our immersive pain education and VR exercise for neck pain. So body image, what is it? Consider it our conscious impression of our body. So it's a pretty broad term, and it can include things like our attitudes towards our body, emotions, and even physical sensations. It does reflect something in the brain. So we talk about encoded representations of the body in the brain. Starts getting a little bit philosophical when we talk in those terms. But these encoded representations of the body are consistently, and how come we can embody different avatars in virtual reality and have them feel like they're our own. Because when we have that congruence between our own movement and where we think our body should be and the visual information that we're getting, we tend to take that on as our own. Of course, on an explicit level, we know it's not us. But we can't help but feel like it's our own, and we use the term ownership. We gain a sense of ownership and agency over a virtual body. Also good to highlight here that our impression or our perception of the body is not the same as the body. So those two things can diverge, and we see them diverge in clinical conditions and things just as we can have them diverge intentionally using a virtual reality system. We see some of this in conditions like chronic low back pain that I'm going to focus on today. So we see low levels of physical self-efficacy, perceived strength, physical skill. We see people who have an impression of their body as being malfunctioning or at risk of re-injury. And we see pain and stiffness without there necessarily being a corresponding or demonstrable injury or pathology in the body. And considering our view of pain as a protective response, then it's possible that pain could emerge, at least in part, from how our body image is reflected. So if our body image, our perceptions, our attitudes towards our body reflects a body that's in need of protection, then we believe that could influence as well. So therefore, if we target that, then we also theorise that we might have an effect on pain. Just to step back to look at a similar idea in another condition where there can also be mismatches between the actual body and how the body is perceived. In the case of anorexia nervosa, the perception of body size, for example, doesn't match actual body size. This is a bit of a pioneering area where there's some early evidence that if you embody an avatar of a normal weight, then when you come out of virtual reality, your perception of body size increases in its accuracy. This seems to be some sort of realignment between your actual body and how you perceive it. So there's something there in whereby when you take ownership over and embody a different avatar, there's a disruption or an updating in your body representation in your brain. And then, you know, there's still, of course, establishing this sort of thing, but there's the potential that after following that disruption and updating, and we return back to the real world, well, there's some potential there that there could be a carryover effect. In the case of persistent pain, pain and how we experience the body is also poorly related to pathology, things that we see on imaging. And as Michelle highlighted, interventions from the past, such as mirror therapy, may be viewed as methods of modifying those body-related representations. And likewise, embodying an avatar, like in the case of anorexia nervosa, may aid in disrupting or updating a body image. So that's indeed what we have been trying to do. So we're asking the question, can embodying a hyper-strong, hyper-capable avatar reduce perceptions of vulnerability and increase perceptions of capability? And of course, does that ultimately change pain? As I go into the case study, quick disclaimer in case I don't make it clear along the way, we don't use case reports to demonstrate efficacy. That's intriguing to look at the data in that way. It's really for describing and exploring a new methodology. This is actually a 1-minute video I show to patients before they do virtual body image training. Because of course, one thing we want them to do is understand. If you don't understand the therapy, it doesn't make sense, and that itself could be a block. Now, I'm hoping as I play this that the audio comes through to you. If not, you'll have to imagine what's being said.
Outside of your awareness, the brain stores information about your body from past experience and from what you have seen, heard, and felt. Some of this information relates to how strong and healthy the brain considers your body, or how fragile and unhealthy it considers it. This information is constantly weighed by the brain to decide, does the body need protection? Yes or no? If most information suggests yes, the brain increases its protection by making you more sensitive. If most information suggests no, the body doesn't need protection, the brain will make you less sensitive. After an injury or problem has had enough time to heal or adapt, the brain can think you need extra protection even if you don't really, resulting in unnecessary pain. In this session, you will be given a superhuman virtual body. Without words, this reminds your subconscious brain that your body is stronger than it might realise, and that extra protection is no longer needed. In time, we hope to develop this idea as a treatment for persistent pain.
Okay, so when we do this with patients, we've sort of standardised the explanation in that way, because education about pain can also have a therapeutic effect. So we're trying to standardise that as much as we can. So that was part of the purpose there. Some of our main outcomes are these ratings, which relate to how people perceive their body. So we're asking them how their body feels to them. Not how it might actually be, but how it feels. So we're asking them about how strong and agile they feel, how vulnerable they feel, and how confident they feel about performing activities. Of course, there's a range of other outcomes, including pain as well, but just wanted to highlight that one. The case study looked like this. So we had 3 face-to-face sessions. Then they this individual did a week of in-home VR, and then we followed them up 1 week and 3 months after that. In the face-to-face sessions, they spent about 15 minutes in virtual reality in 3 different applications that I'll introduce you to. And then we assessed them after as well. 6 daily sessions and outcome assessments at 1 and 3 months, as I said. So these are the applications that we used in the first session. So you'll see them there. It was a bit hard to show you how it looks from that first person perspective, because of course they're not seeing their hand and then the virtual body behind that. The virtual body is in effect in place of where their real body is. So you can see we chose applications that really are very inconsistent with a body that's vulnerable, or a body that's weak, or a body that can't do things. So really trying to not only just disrupt their body image as that stands, but nudge it in a particular direction that's towards a body that's capable, that's resilient, that's trustworthy. In the subsequent sessions, so these ones were the ones we did on day 1 and just introduced them to it, doing simple tasks. In the second, third and the home sessions, we really honed in on these boxing ones, because it turned out this guy in his mid to late 40s had done some boxing in his youth and early 20s. So we saw that actually as an opportunity to almost reinstate or bring his body image back to one that was also pre-existing. So it's interesting to consider the effect that might have had. I don't have videos of all of them, but just to give you an idea of how one of them looked. This is how the rock climbing. This is the only one that didn't have a full body. So in this case, it just had strong looking hands, and they did a task which would obviously require a lot of strength. The data from the case study looked like this. So just give you the data from within each face-to-face session and at 1 and 3 month follow-up. And I won't give you the data for each of these different domains. I'll just give you the average of the 3 of those. It's just a bit much information on screen. So relative to before the virtual reality session, there seemed to be a real uptick in these perceptions of the body. Similar pattern for session 2 and 3, and the that feeling of increased strength and confidence seemed to persist in that immediately post period. So they came out of virtual reality, and when we immediately reassessed these things, it hadn't yet gone back to baseline. After a week of doing it in home, we followed him up at 1 and 3 months, and there seemed to be a maintenance of those changes. So that was interesting to see, and he really loved it and engaged with it as well. In terms of pain, we saw a similar pattern in those immediate changes whilst in VR, which at least to a degree we would expect that regardless of what we were doing in VR, simply because of its distractive components. But the blue ones were the average pain over the last week. So you see they trend downwards across the sessions, and compared to baseline, he seemed better off at the 3 month mark. So that's where we're at with the case report, currently under review. So hopefully that will be out relatively soon. The pilot trial, funded by the Hopkins seeding grant, did actually start before COVID, but of course we've been on a standstill. There's some of the team members from the pain centre there. We're looking at recruiting 30 participants here, and we're also looking at including a non-superhero control condition, because that gives us a bit of extra information. It tells us, firstly, if the sort of response we saw in the case report is unique, or whether other people also seem to have a similar effect. And it also tells us whether the effect is dependent on the sort of avatars that we've chosen, as opposed to just having any old virtual reality experience. So we look forward to that. And importantly, we're using a mixed design for that as well. So we're following people up with qualitative interviews, because we're really interested in not just these particular outcomes that we've picked out, but really what is that experience like for people coming into a body that's so much more capable and stronger looking than what they're used to. And of course, we're interested in understanding anything that might prevent us from moving forwards with it as a treatment as well, any limitations like motion sickness. I think I've got a minute or two just to give you a quick snapshot of what we're doing with pain education. So we've really tried to rack our brains, think what we don't want to do is just take any old pain education and present it in virtual reality like it's a video. So we wanted to make it interactive. We want to gamify, and we want people to learn through experience and activities rather than just getting information. So a couple snapshots here. I'm going to skim forward a little bit. So we can capture a presenter in 3 dimensions, and we can give information and we can animate it around it. So here I'm asking, why are shark attacks painless? And a shark comes in and I'm going to dodge it. So sort of bringing normal pain education content to life a little bit there. That's not the most novel part. In another section, people go into a kitchen, and in this particular kitchen, they're asked to do things like boil the kettle and make toast. But the alarm system is turned up to a high degree of sensitivity, so that doing these ordinary things set off the alarm. So this room they're actually going to come back to as they go through other modules, and in other modules they're going to earn shields, and they're going to bring those shields back, and they're going to reduce the protectiveness of this alarm. And this alarm, of course, is an analogy for their own protective pain system. And of course that's just an analogy, but at the same time, as we go through these different education modules and we take some of the threat and worry out of their problem, then we hope that to some degree that will reduce the protectiveness of their nervous system.
To let go of an object, simply place it where you want it and release all the protectiveness. Alarm has been functions like great.
Of course, it moves around like this because it's being recorded with someone's head moving. That's the kitchen catching on fire. I'm just going to skip through a little bit. If you've heard me present before, you've probably heard me talk about a story of a chap who, on a building site, he jumps on a nail and he's just writhing in pain. He has to go to hospital and be sedated and everything. Turns out the nail went between his toes and there was no damage. Tells us something about pain as a protective response. Here we've, oops, I've gone backwards. I've gone forwards. It's in here. Here we've animated it in 3 dimensions. So we put the person right inside that story. They can feel like they're watching it in a first-person perspective. I'll give you
of movements. Bob had to be sedated with strong drugs.
Okay, so you get the idea of that one. If you work in pain, you've probably heard of David Butler and what he calls dim sim therapy. It's really about identifying threats and safety cues in your life, and in sorting out the different things and addressing them, you sort of bring your level of anxiety and threat down, and they link back to pain. Of course, we're implementing this with their permission. In this case,
we refer
they can
to as
safety their own,
or sim, in short.
Dims
can
and
reduce
sims,
our possibility
and there's
of
some
feeling
pre-made
pain.
ones here.
On the other hand, a negative thought affects the pain.
So they can find these safety and danger cues, and they can put them in the machine, and they can see the effect of that on their nervous system and their pain system. I'm running out of time, so I might skip over the last bit, but you get the idea. We're trying to make it interactive and engaging. I'm okay? Okay, I'll just touch quickly on our neck pain application as well. So this is designed to bring in a bit of pain education, but also includes some exercise therapy and some relaxation training as well. So I've been over a bit of what some of the pain education will look like. Another interesting thing we can do is measure range of motion and give feedback. So here, this person is firstly measuring their movement and then just doing some simple range of motion exercises by popping balloons with their neck movement. Gives a real popping sound like popping bubble wrap. It's quite satisfying. And then, oh, skipped over again. Something a lot of physios do is train movement control or proprioception. And they'll do it by putting a laser pointer on the head and having people trace things on a wall. What we've done here is make a balloon trace various shapes around the virtual environment, and people's task is to follow it as closely and smoothly as they possibly can, and they get feedback about how well they're doing that. So that looks a little bit like this. Some people have a view of that thinks that sort of proprioception and movement control links to stresses in tissues. I tend to think of it more like the maps of our body and movement need a certain degree of organisation and precision in order to control movement, and that precision in sensing and moving relates to how well we can inhibit things in the nervous system. So there's peripheral and central explanations as to why that might be useful. And also building in some relaxation training. I quite like meditation in virtual reality because you can lead people to a state of relaxation without the new agey, yoga-y sort of language that doesn't appeal to everyone. Okay, so I think I've got through in reasonable time, and now we're up to question time. I might just need to exit this slide so that I can see the questions come up in the chat box. So I'm not sure what you're seeing now, but either way, as long as I can see the questions, that's the main thing. Okay, Mikala, I can only see your comments in the chat box. Now, have you got other ones? Oh, she's giving me sign language here. Oh, published. Okay, great. I'm on to it. Okay, I'll just work from the top. And I'll pass back and forth between Michelle and I as appropriate. Pete Hawley has asked, what are the plans post-study to commercialise this kind of technology? I guess that's a question for Michelle and I. Yeah, so there's opportunities to commercialise it. I guess at the moment we're sort of taking the slow road in that we're looking for some indication that we're on the right track before we start making promises to the public. There are barriers to cross in terms of how you distribute it and deal with safety issues and those sort of things. But we definitely see the commercialisation as perhaps even a necessary evil when it comes to commercialising technology, because you need to provide customer support, you need to update software for new virtual reality headsets, etc., and that, there could be a side benefit that we can funnel revenue back into research as well. So, good question. Robin Grote, hi Robin. Body dysmorphia from anorexia nervosa is an area of interest for neuropsychiatrists. Oh, okay, you got it. Sort of got ahead of my comment. Another one from Robin. One of Dan's earlier comments about disembodiment. That is certainly one of the aims of traditional meditation. Yeah. Will VR achieve a similar state? Great questions. There are some researchers, I'm thinking of Mel Slater in Spain, who has created an out-of-body illusion that uses both tactile feedback and a virtual reality environment to lift people up out of their bodies. So you can look up Nell Slater, and if you want to look at how he's done that. Some interesting reasons why you might want to do that. Out-of-body experiences have been linked to things like lowering your fear of death and having a greater sense of empathy. You know, it's the experience of feeling like one with the universe, like you're not attached to a physical thing. For some people, can have quite profound effects. Anonymous, how much is the cost of VR equipment? We're doing quite a lot with a wireless headset called the Oculus Quest, which is amazing and doesn't require a computer to be attached to it, and that's about $600 or $700. That's starting to bring high quality tech into a price range that could reach a pretty big market. If you want the more powerful systems, if you've got a reason for that, you've got to add a $4,000 computer to your budget. Robin, really promising work, Dan and Michelle. Can this be extended to pain from other neuros, spinal conditions, etc.? Yeah, well, you highlight that actually a lot of the work has come from the neurological space. I think sky's the limit, I guess. If you've got a condition in mind and some, I think the trick is always we don't want to be using technology for the sake of technology. So always the question is, what is a feature of virtual reality that can enable us to do something for this condition that we couldn't normally. I'm just going to check on the time yet. Still got 7 minutes. Another anonymous. When you measure pain during VR, does the measurement of pain result in them coming out of VR? Yeah, that's a good question. So we talk about the concept of immersion, which is the degree to which people really feel like they're in the virtual environment. And if they have an avatar, then we also talk about the degree to which they really feel like that's their body. And, that's an illusion that can be disrupted. But, and I think anything you introduce from the outside world has the potential to diminish that to some degree. We didn't measure it, but I would always be, a bit cautious about how much external feedback I gave someone. If what I was aiming for them to do was to detach from the real world. Great questions. We're down to 3. Andrew Rayfield, have you compared the effects that you see with the VR system with more traditional gaming systems? Could there be a similar effect? Gaming systems have been used in hospital setting for a long time. I remember 20 years ago playing Xbox or Nintendo or something in hospital when I was having various procedures. I can't quote the research. They haven't been compared head to head a lot, but I think it has been done. And there is some additive effect of virtual reality. I'm not sure the magnitude of the difference, but it comes down to the degree to which one thing is more distracting, or the degree to which it captures a greater share of your attention. And virtual reality just has a superior capacity to do that. Robin, you ask good questions. We need you at all of our shows. Can you use some of the work done in 3MDR done in the Netherlands, Military Psychotraumatic Centre, to treat pain? anesthesia to treat PTSD following trauma. But would the pathways be similar? I assume the sort of therapy you're talking about is exposure therapy, where they would use virtual reality to bring people into scenarios that normally might trigger their symptoms, and maybe to do things in a very graduated way, just bringing small components of triggers into their virtual environment. You know, exposure therapy is a well-used treatment for persistent pain as well, and I'm sure there's something to be learned from that literature that could be translated to the chronic pain space for people who are fearful of movement and activities, and perhaps gradually reintroducing them to activities that they've come to be afraid of and avoid because of their situation. Are there studies by your group or others that might use VR for anxiety disorders? Well, PTSD is one of those. So in a way, Robin's answered that already. Basically retraining the brain, says Andrew. Yeah, I think a lot of these things we can put under that umbrella. Second to last, Cara Burns. Great work, Michelle and Dan. Are there plans to allow patients to choose the VR environments? And does this matter? Are there other ways to personalise the experience? Great question. I'm talking to a pain clinic about this at the moment. There are over 1,000 different applications on the Oculus store now, which is one of the databases for virtual reality games and experiences. You know, they're of course of varying quality, and a lot of them are first-person shooter games and all of that. But you know, if someone has a yearning to play a game of tennis, but they just don't have the physical capability, then we can dial up a game of tennis and have them engage in a game of tennis in a virtual sense. So we're only limited by the types of activities and environments that people are interested in, and what software's available to us, and that's growing all the time. Thinking back to the case study, you know, I still wonder to what degree it seemed to be helpful to this case, because he really identified with that boxer. So I think that personalisation could be really important. And Grace Bittner, could this have applicability for conditions where pain is not persistently located in a single place, i.e. where pain comes and goes from different locations? Yeah, potentially. I mean, the intervention that I used with that case study, in many ways, isn't specifically tailored for the lower back. You know, it's not like I had them doing activities that specifically engaged the back. So yeah, there's potential for that. I think it's a future line of research to try to identify what sort of patient with what sort of presenting complaints and contributing factors might benefit from that sort of thing. Pain that is unpredictable in the way that you've described, you know, could add an element of challenge, I guess. Yeah, that's probably the best I can do to answer that question right now. I think we're pretty much right on 2:30. Thank you so much for those great questions. I sort of powered through them, so I hope I did them justice and failed to bring Michelle in the process. So thanks a lot for joining us. Like Michelle said at the start, the recording and presentations will be made available to you in due course. So you are welcome to log off now, and hope to see you again in a future event.